Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural episode of a new podcast on defense of the patients. And we're actually not sure what to call it just yet, but it's going to be one that focuses on the professional scene a bit more of Dota, as you guys are already used to the Try Hard Tuesdays and Theorycraft Thursdays, two other great shows produced by Defense of the Patients. And so we're just going to give you a quick introduction. I'm going to be your host, at least for the time being, for this show, and I'm Korean Barbecue, and with me is Woodshrew Dota. And Woodshrew, if you'd like to give yourself a quick intro.
Yeah, what's up, guys? I go by Ying or Woodshrew Dota, and previously I did a little bit of writing for Join Dota. I've hopped on the .p podcast in the past, I think 2 or 3 now, and yeah, I'm just super excited to share some thoughts, have some discussion with Jack about the pro scene.
Good to be working with you, Shrew, at long last. And I've worked with Shrew before for a little bit at Dota FM, where I was the station manager, and still am, although we're a little bit less active these days. We'll be ramping things up to cover things some more. And I've also recently been blessed with the opportunity, on and off, always in the scene, of being able to go to Frankfurt and be the Chinese translator. So that was a lot of fun and a great learning experience. And I've played Dota on and off for a number of years, and also done some writing as well. So it's nice to be on this kind of show talking about the professional scene. So we're going to get right into it here, not too much time on this chaff, but the grand final, wrapping up Frankfurt, Secret versus OG. OG came in and took a 3-1 victory. OG, of course, on the brink of elimination many times throughout the course of the tournament. I think they were one game away from losing multiple times after the beginning. And Shrew, if you want to take us into that series.
Yeah, I mean, heading into the series, as someone who's been supporting quite a few players on Team Secret, for a long time, I really liked watching the old Na'Vi around the TI2, TI3 era, and especially following Eternal Envy's professional career and players like Pilot Eye. I had a lot invested in terms of watching Secret perform, but OG scared the crap out of me, the living crap, because I knew coming into Frankfurt that they were actually one of the strongest European teams, just judging by their performances. And especially on online qualifiers, they always seem to do quite well. And even in the past against Secret, they did decently. I believe they took a series. They lost the series 2-1. I think that was at the MLG World Finals. So even against Secret, while they haven't played much, I think it was only one series previously, they still showed quite a few of their strengths. But coming into this grand final, OG, I think, was started from the very first round of the lower bracket, because they had a very difficult group with Vega Squadron actually winning their head-to-head matchup. And OG was just taking name after name. And I think a lot of pros have talked about how some teams will sort of grow within a tournament, and those are the teams that you should be most fearful of in terms of the meta game within the tournament, the tournament meta game. I think team captains such as Eternal Envy and PPD have mentioned it quite routinely, that it's hard to really predict who will be the most feared team, because these things change within this tournament. And when you talk about Frankfurt, which was, I believe, a week and a bit long, including the group stages and the main event, there's a lot of time for teams to get together and have a very thorough recovery from won and lost games and sort of figure themselves out. And OG was one team that just showed incredible adaptability in that sense, and I think that was actually one of their biggest strengths going into the series.
Yeah, so just recapping the results real quick, and actually I think Lanham himself at Frankfurt, he said, when you come into these kinds of tournaments and events, there's always a team that grows really fast and learns really fast. And you've seen, even as recently as TI5 with CDEC's seemingly Cinderella run coming up from the wild card, that these teams can do well very quickly. And we'll talk about this later. Even TI winning teams tend to form quickly. But OG about as started it from the bottom as they could for this tournament. As you mentioned, they finished near the bottom of their group, not in the winner's bracket. So they had a best of 1 against Fnatic in the first round of lower bracket, which they won. Then they took on Mineski in the second round, which they won 2-0. Then Virtus Pro, which they won 2-1. CDEC finally a 2-0 convincing victory for them, which we'll get to at some point. And then, of course, Lanham himself, who said those things about teams, and his own team certainly embodied that, improving and gelling very quickly as the tournament went on, were the last ones to be eliminated in the lower bracket by OG before they went on to beat Evil Geniuses and then finally take the tournament. So yeah, these teams, they can, I mean, sometimes you wonder maybe if they played more Dota, if you played this tournament however many times, you'd have different results just because of how volatile things are and maybe how few games these teams truly get to play. But this was a team that really seemed to pick up steam after the group stages and showed pretty well. So getting into the adaptability that you're talking about, what did you notice from this tournament in terms of their hero choices?
I found that OG was... They kind of had a similar philosophy of drafting in some sense in comparison to Team Secret, who definitely came into the tournament as favorites, I think. Even though Evil Genius was highly respected and regarded, they didn't have tournament results they could point to, like concrete results. Seeing as Secret won both the Nanyang and as well as the MLG World Finals international tournaments previously. So getting back to what I was saying, OG kind of drafts similar to Secret in the sense that they don't play a very rigid play style. They don't have a very specific style that they play, and rather they have multiple sort of avenues that they can go down based on like the core heroes that they draft, especially for Miracle. That should be made. I should point that out. It's sort of like a rock paper scissors situation. That's how I kind of think of it. Except they have like 2 rocks and then paper scissors, because they have that tiny wisp draft that they probably were most well known for right from the get-go, seeing as they have No-Tail, who's an extremely gifted wisp player, and since he swapped towards the carry role, he's demonstrated that he understands the tiny part of it just as well. So that was like, that's like their kind of like lethal level strat. Like teams are not happy and are not ready to, they don't feel comfortable basically matching up against it. So you see a lot of tiny first bans. Not tiny first ban, sorry, the Wisp first ban, to put it like to end of that right at the draft screen, right at the start. And then you have next on the list of that rock paper scissors thing, you've got Miracle Shadow Fiend, which is probably what the team relied upon the most in their climb of the lower bracket. Like they were just decimating teams with Miracle going like 8-0, 10-0, just tremendous net worth. And they just really know how to really max out Miracle skills on that one hero. I mean, 8,000 matchmaking points is one thing, but 8,000 matchmaking points and getting supported by Flying Crit is like a whole nother thing. Stacking the jungle heavily for him, rotating for him, setting him up early on to secure early souls, and getting a quick bottle in Shadow Fiend. These things make the world for these mid matchups, and OG just demonstrates such a great understanding in that. And to carry on that concept of setting up their mid lane player, their third probably signature draft is their Alchemist drafts for Miracle. I think Miracle plays a very unique style. I don't know if no one else emulates it or goes the same build, but he goes this kind of like battle Alchemist build, going for the treads, going for the Solar Crest, and then going for a Blink Dagger. Picking these very utility items that maximize the farm advantage that an Alchemist can build. And it's kind of horrifying to play against such a tanky, evading and also like jumping around Alchemist so early into the game, because these blink timings are very quick because of Alchemist's natural ability to farm well. And they set up the Alchemist mid lane very similarly to how they draft around the Shadow Fiend, giving him a mid lane dual lane treatment with heroes such as like Undying, Dazzle, and Bane come to mind. And it's like they put such a great emphasis on not only giving him a strong start in the lane, but also securing him the bounty runes that I don't think any other team was emulating in Frankfurt. That it was just it was like almost a perfect win condition kind of draft. Like you can win the lane against the Alchemist, like you can counter the Alchemist in lane very heavily, but unless you're prepared to block every way that the Alchemist can come back into the game as well as get ahead, then you were really put into a really tough situation. Like you have to block his camps or at least invade his jungle to take his stacks. You have to prevent the Ancients being stacked and also contest those. You have to stop him from getting every bounty rune in the game, which just explodes his net worth. And you still have to win the middle lane, which is just so many things to do, right? And even if you do those things, Miracle isn't going to play a passive style of Alchemist. He's going to get those value items like a Solar Crest and a Blink, and he's going to participate in early game fights, which is something that I thought was quite unique. So, I mean, with those three, and talking, I mean, we can go on about their additional signature drafts, but I felt like those three were the main means that OG relied upon to just win this tournament. Pretty much, it was like it's like they just figured it out. They figured out what they needed for themselves, and what they needed out of their 8K MMR middle lane player, and I mean, they came out of Frankfurt the winners, right?
Yeah, and a couple great points that you mentioned in there that I wanted to circle back on a little bit. The first being kind of, having like a signature draft. Now, that seems to be something that's really important for a lot of these better teams, where they have like a really comfort level draft or combination that they go to. In this case, probably the Wisp Tiny centric kind of strategy. And then you see teams would go out of their way sometimes in the first ban phase to deal with that. Or, sometimes a team, for example, I think eHome's solution was to try to get the Ancient Apparition and Queen of Pain, who have two good, both just mobility and ways of blowing up the Wisp from either far away or whoever the Wisp is supposed to be healing and keeping alive. So that was something that, but when you go ahead and, get those heroes early, it does expose you to other things. Or if they get banned, you have to find other solutions. And it kind of gives them the initiative back. So that was interesting. And as for the Alchemist part, another thing you mentioned that was really interesting for the professional scene is that it's nice to see heroes played a multitude of different ways.
Yeah.
Like, not just what you said about how they played, but also in perhaps the most exciting game of the tournament, or at least the most tense game of the tournament for me, which was Unknown going up against Newbie, how they played that safe lane Alchemist going with the Armlet build. So here's the thing about Alchemist for the most part. When you play that Alchemist in the mid lane, you see a lot of the other style that you mentioned, which is more of a split-pushing Radiance, Manta, Octarine, a guy who puts pressure on all of your lanes, basically, and is able to try to control the map that way. But there are some vulnerabilities to that, and I think teams are starting to realize if you play that dedicated farming Alchemist who maybe has a bit more tunnel vision and is focused on his own net worth, he's not able to have an impact that some other mids are and help other lanes. So when you go for a fighting build instead, he becomes both very tanky and difficult to kill with some level of armor and evasion, as you mentioned, on that Solar Crest build or the Armlet, and he's able to contribute and blow people up. And sometimes teams had to adjust to the fact that the Alchemist could just blink in and just kill someone. In the secret Game 2 against OG in the finals, I think near the bottom, Eternal Envy got caught when he was coming back from the secret shop, and the Alch just blew him up. And if you go for like a more of a farming, split-pushing build, it becomes harder to reach that point. But sometimes you're out of position and you can just die to the Alchemist.
Yeah, that was actually crazy. I mean, that Alchemist build had a direct influence on the outcome of that series, because those first two opening games, I think they were both Alchemist Miracle games, if I am recalling correctly. But the effect of just having so much net worth spent onto very effective items that help you participate in fights, and then that blink stun combination is just absurd. Like, I think it's like 3+ seconds of just hard lockdown. Miracle was picking off Envy's anti-mage in ways that you don't really see an anti-mage die, right? Like, anti-mage has a tremendous ability to survive ganks, but even just a solo hero blinking in, giving himself the lockdown that he needs, and then also having the items like a Solar Crest, having that acid spray, and having I think a very early assault cuirass. Suddenly this anti-mage that is, conceivably impossible to kill, he's at like, -5 armor, and he's stunned for 4 seconds, and there's almost nothing that can survive to that kind of abuse. So yeah, I mean, Miracle bringing a lot to the table in terms of how he views these kind of meta heroes and bringing his own flavor to the series. I thought that was the difference maker, I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what 6.86 brings, because patches can be notoriously harsh for certain teams. But, we see from this tournament, this team has a lot of potential. They have been performing well in the events leading up to this, too. So they obviously have shown their chops as a top team. They finally managed to break through and win a championship. And, I mean, it'll be exciting to see what they do in the next major, in the next few tournaments, and leading up to TI6. Hopefully they can stay together and prove to be another potent Western team in the mix that's here to stay.
Yeah, I really like the future for OG, because I think, like Secret, they have a mixture of very long-time veterans, either of the Dota scene or as well as the Han scene when you talk about Fly and No Till. And they also have some relatively new talent in the sense that Miracle, it's his first year in the well, I don't know if it's his first or second year in the professional scene. Still a relatively, new player. It's his first chance on the absolute tier 1 professional level of play, joining into OG, and so they've got this mixture of like newer players and older veterans that can kind of guide their progression and their development, and so trying to project where their ceiling is and how good they can be is, it's who knows, right? I mean, coming out of Frankfurt, winning a major, this could really just galvanize the team into getting better and better, and suddenly they could take this momentum and just run away with it, right?
Absolutely. And just looking back through the history, I think Miracle was on Balkan Bears. So I'm not actually sure if he was actually teammates with Weeha at some point. But, as one of the casters mentioned, I think it was Mel, there was a 16,000 MMR in that mid lane at some point. So it's nice to see a relatively new, considered a public player, more or less, high MMR star, making his impact and helping to win. And we'll get to that more as well in terms of the high MMR players and how they're starting to impact the scene a little bit more maybe than before. But speaking of Secret, you mentioned them and their performance. They finished second in this tournament to OG, but this has still been a really strong year for them so far. They came in second also in New York City at ESL, but they won Nanyang and MLG afterwards, and a second place finish for them. So what do you think of how they performed and their prospects going forward?
Secret's kind of strange. When they win, they don't look brilliant. Like they're like one of the strangest, most dominant like teams I've watched in a while. When EG was like on like the really top of the world with the old Zion RTZ lineup, when the way they won tournaments and won games was like, okay, this game is over at 20 minutes. But with Secret, it's like, okay, Envy's got a rapier. It's 50 minutes. I'm waiting for the RP. I'm really nervous. Like the way they win is just so kind of unconventional. And like I said previously, they kind of have their own kind of pet strat and signature style strategies that are all kind of unique in their own sense. If you recall back when they were winning tournaments in Nanyang and MLG World Finals, they were depending a lot on Misery Brood early on, and then they've kind of gone away from that and had Misery play more of a controlling role with his slaughter pick, his comfort pick. But yeah, with Secret, it appears to me just from like just aesthetic wise, watching the way they play, the style of way they play, they don't play like super clean and perfect Dota, and so in that sense, they have a lot of room to improve. They could sharpen everything up. They could kind of tune everything up another notch, right? Because again, like this roster has been together for a relatively short time. But it's a little bit weird. They were coming in with so much momentum, like so much momentum. I feel like if they had won this Frankfurt major, I mean, the world was their oyster. Like 3 huge tournament wins going into the spring with like all of the confidence, or I guess the winter season. But now, I mean, like they kind of took it kind of hard, right? If you checked out their tweets after the tournament, I mean, Eternal Envy is notorious for being like I don't want to say drama queen, but a somewhat overly dramatic player, especially on social media, and saying things like "I'm broken," ... Like I don't want to play Dota. I'm just gonna play like console games. I'm gonna go buy a TV. So I mean, they're having fun with it, but I fully expect them to still be in the top 2, top 3 class of teams, just because of how gifted each of their players are in terms of adapting to new patches, thinking about the game, and I mean, you kind of have this weird like brain trust of these Western Dota geniuses in a sense. They have Pylidai, who has long been respected as a captain and drafter when he was playing for Speed and C9. You have Envy, his views of the game are somewhat polarizing, but again, they just time and time again seem to work. And of course, you have Puppy, which is like the grandfather of drafting, the grandfather of Western Dota, EU Dota. So I'm still excited to be a follower of Secret, of watching their games, and I guess sitting on the edge of my seat watching Envy throw away rapiers and throwing away wins.
Yeah, but I mean, Jackie's just such an easy player to love. I mean, he's so passionate about the game. He really just pours heart and soul into it. The nickname for him in the Chinese scene is actually like the artiste, basically, because he sees things that nobody else sees, and that can go both ways, either good or bad. So you'll see, I'm reminded of a couple tournaments ago when he comes from behind. Was it ESL, I think, when he comes from behind with the Ember Spirit from the side of the base? He kind of just dies in there. And
that was so funny, actually. I remember everyone in the Skype call, like, we were having like a stream call. We were just like silent. It's just like, what is Envy doing? It's just like, okay. Like, you're either like, oh my gosh, Envy's winning the game, and then suddenly it's like, okay, we're losing the game.
Yeah. At the same time, though, it's nice to have someone who, because here's the thing, right? If you talk about like Team Dota and organized Dota, it really just comes down to teams at this level, and a lot of decisions are not in a vacuum, right or wrong. That's part of the complexity of Dota. It kind of matters if there's someone there to maybe help you make that decision into a right one, and so that's trust. But you need someone to keep pushing that envelope and keep pushing the limits of what's possible. So as you mentioned, it's nice to have these kinds of original minds. As for Puppy's drafts, like a lot of times it's kind of subtle, like how it's going to come through, how it's going to all come together. But maybe even Secret drops a game or something early on in the series, and they're kind of just working out the kinks a little bit, and then it comes together the next game, or maybe later on in the game you start to see really the genius of it. And also, we mentioned a little bit earlier how it's important to have these kind of signature drafts to go to. I feel like for this tournament for Secret, it might have been that Ember Magnus draft. And I think we saw after they dropped one of their games to OG, they immediately went for the early pick Ember because they had that much confidence. And, Puppy being one of the most respected captains, how can you not have confidence in the guy and know that you're always going to be in a good place with him as a leader and him doing the drafting?
Yeah, I really like what you said right there with highlighting Puppy's confidence as a drafter, because it's something that has been in the back of my mind for a while. And when I truly try to start to study drafts and drafting trends with certain captains, I don't know if this is just me, but you can kind of sense the personality of the drafter through how he views certain heroes, how he picks, how he reacts to wins and losses. And with Puppy, you were talking about his confidence, right? I don't know if I've seen a drafter do what he's done recently, which is if he wins with a combo, like an opening pairing of heroes, say for example the Magnus Ember. If he won that game, even if it was a tough game, he'll still come out game 2 and be like, you know what? Beat this. Like, come at us. Like, I don't you know what I mean? He's not really concerned about, coming in with another fresh strat, throw another one of our, curveballs at these guys. It's like, no, like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do it again. Come beat us right now. And that's what they did against, I think, EG. I think they won the first game with, that was just an absurd game with Eternal Envy having, I think, double rapiers and one-shotting PvD routinely. And they just open up with game 2. They're just like, okay, just do it again. And even though they lost that game, it's just so much, it gives your team so much of a personality and a kind of a style of their own. It gives your team something that can't really be quantified, I think. Something that can't really be represented statistically, right? It's like a little bit of swagger, I guess? Is that what we could call it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. It's also, it's composure. It's like he doesn't overreact to things. And you see this going as far back as maybe even before TI2, I think, when it was Naga, Darkseer, and all that setup was all the rage. And then he basically said, hey, we figured out a way to beat this, and we're sticking to our guns. And we're going to be able to deal with this death ball, wombo combo stuff. And that continues now. And even among the Chinese, their opinion of Puppy, someone said to me basically, this is someone who knows how to figure out, he knows how to tinker with the things that need to be changed in the drafts while not losing the big picture and not just overreacting to things. Like, he can figure out exactly what went wrong. So he might pick the same heroes and be like, you know what, we lost that game because we didn't play well, or we lost that game because just this little bit didn't work in this segment of the game, not because of the draft. Whereas some other people might tend to overreact a little bit, or, under the pressure, and say, you know what, we're not going to deal with this hero this game just because we lost to it last game, or something like that. So he's been around the block quite a bit. Obviously, I think has he been at all 5 TIs, one of the few players to have that distinction? And obviously he's won one as well. So this is a pretty seasoned and respected captain for good reason.
Oh, you just took my buzzword right out of my mouth. I was going to just say, he's kind of like that high-class chef who, it's like, you know what, our soup was good today. It sold well last night. Let's throw it out again tonight. But, I think it was a little bit too spicy. Let me change up, the herbs we use a little bit, right? drawing comparisons to another Salt Master, but like Puppy as like the seasoned pro and also just so good at just making those fine adjustments and just turning the game right back, flipping it right back at the opposing captain at the draft screen. So yeah, I mean, I just love watching Secret's views on the game. That's one thing that draws me so close to like towards that team, because they always come out with something a little bit unique, a little bit fresh, and that's kind of carried over from, I guess, Envy's C9 days, as well as Pilot Eye, of course.
So speaking of Envy, I think he mentioned recently after a tournament, when they were asking him about this new look, Secret, of course, undergoing its reshuffle after TI, he said, basically, I'm not sure if he was being facetious or not, but he said we wanted a high MMR mid to anchor our team, and I'm sure it wasn't that simple. I'm sure they had to find somebody who was maybe qualified or experienced as well, but they did find their 8,000 MMR player, and that was Weeha, and Weeha has made a noticeable impact on the scene with heroes like Wind Ranger and now called the Weepo. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about MMR and how that's impacting the professional scene. What do you think about that?
I mean, I gotta, start off this entire segment with shouting out Smash. I think the first NA player to obtain AK on one of the hardest servers to do it, Peru, that is. So, I mean, the high MMR kind of this kind of new wave of core players. You think about Sumail as sort of the the best shining example of how it can work just beautifully, right? For Evil Geniuses at TI. But it kind of really started with, I guess, Saichizi being one of the highest ranked players on the USC's leaderboard, the US West leaderboards, making a big splash in the professional scene. But that didn't really shape how, I think, the relationship between MMR and how easily these players could integrate into onto high-level teams. You didn't really see captains or teams take a chance on these super high-skilled players until you saw Sumail make it just work perfectly, right? So I thought that was a very peculiar trend, that it's not really about how the game is played, but how it's like thought about, and how team compositions are thought about. If the the mid player for your team can just kind of bring all the raw skill and give you this tremendous advantage in terms of these kind of unbeatable player and hero pairings. When you're talking about the Weepo, the Wee Ranger, the Miracle SF, the Miracle Alchemist. These are things that not every team can pull off because they don't have, 8,000 matchmaking points to send to the mid lane, right? It's something that is developed from the player when he's making those solo queue runs, right? Deep into the night, picking up that 5 MMR against a stack of 5Kers when he's got to carry like 3K players, right? It's not something that you can just kind of pick up overnight. It's not something you can just emulate right from the go. And that's something that I think informs how Secret and OG draft, because they can just do what they want to do. You can take our strats, right? You know what we draft. You know how we draft. It's kind of like a challenge. It's like anyone else in the pro scene, you can do what we do, but do you have Miracle? Do you have Weeha? No one else has, and I think no other two teams have that much young, raw skill in their core mid players. So I think it's something really fresh and interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I think what's especially interesting about this is also kind of maybe a shifting perspective on public Dota. So this has been one of the main differences, I think, between Chinese Dota and Western Dota for some time. In the Western scene, the teams, for the most part, they don't live together or train together except to boot camp for tournaments and events. They basically live and play on their own, and sometimes, that's the only way that it's possible when they're to practice on their own when they're in vastly different time zones or across the Atlantic from each other. So they play a lot of public games and they solo queue for the most part, and they just learn whatever they can because the overall skill level of Dota players these days is much higher, I think, than it's ever been. There's so much information out there. There's so many people who are qualified not only to play at a high level, but very specifically qualified to play their individual heroes, as we learned with, I think, Vega. Didn't their Brood player learn from a pub, and that was on Reddit? They got some training from a public player.
Yeah, Meg was getting lessons from, I think, one of the best Broodmother players in terms of like the Dota Buff rankings, and he comes out, wins ESL New York for his team, and everyone's like, okay, this is something else to be on the watch for. People getting lessons from these, hero spammers, I guess you could say.
Right. So, I mean, that's a huge, I think that's become kind of an advantage. Not only do you respect these players more and start picking them up, giving them chances on teams in a setting, but also you learn these little tips and tricks and these little quirks of the game just from these public games. There's like a lot of little details to absorb. And you're just more generally exposed to like the flow of ideas from the general community.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Chinese scene, it's a little bit different. I mean, for the most part, the teams are under much tighter conditions. They live together. I think in an interview with Zhao, Vici's manager, he said that at some point they weren't even allowed to have their cell phones. They weren't really allowed to contact girlfriends or family or anything, just to keep out all outside distractions. And
Yeah.
it's
I think
yeah,
I
it's
remember. I think I remember. Sorry, just bring up something peculiar. I remember. I think Ice was talking about how he had to sneak out of the Team DK team house so he could like see his girlfriend from time to time. So talk about kind of like full control and like a lockdown, really devoted and focused environment. It's something that's completely different, right? But yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's different. And it's very insular, and I think you can start. You can look at how the Chinese teams. I mean, obviously not to panic too much if you're a Chinese Dota fan and all that. And we'll talk a little bit more about their performance later as well. But maybe they're used to playing more against each other in these controlled scrims against other set teams at the team house practicing together, and they don't take as many outside influences. It's kind of a, I don't want to say insular, like kind of like an incestuous process in some ways. And this might be stretching a little bit, but I wanted to bring that example back to maybe even how China did things a couple centuries ago historically, how they viewed that they were better than everybody else, and they became very insular. They stopped taking in new ideas from the outside world, and lo and behold, the rest of the world passes you by, and you're the ones left playing catch up. So if I were an alarmist for Chinese Dota at all, I would probably say that they should learn from this kind of outreach and like more willingness to learn from the community and embrace these new ideas that are not necessarily brought in just by professionals or professional teams.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating kind of an observation that you make, because it's something that I was sort of discussing with a couple of friends on Skype recently. I really like China is really a kind of a closed system in terms of how they are able to develop their own ideas on the game and how they're able to build their own styles, because they can't play with C as far as I know. I'm not sure, because they have like the perfect world system and like all these different clients. Like you don't really see the Chinese and SEA scenes being very closely related, right? They're quite different in terms of how they're structured. I mean, they're completely different in terms of how the gaming organizations function. But then you like kind of see the other regions and how they interact, and you have the European region, which is kind of like I think of the international Dota scene as kind of the China scene is kind of closed off. The SEA scene is kind of closed off because ping and crappy servers. Korea, like okay, that to even higher degree. And then you have this European scene that in of itself has its own kind of built-in sub-region, like the CIS stereotype or whatever that's existed since TI1, just divide, right? And then you have this you have like the Euro and also NA mixed teams, kind of like I call it like the transatlantic region, where you have the old teams like for example Team Secret, C9. Those were the two top, I guess, transatlantic teams, and also quote unquote European teams in this past year or so. Even I guess EG fits under the category, but then you also have the North American region as well that has their own specific kind of flavor, right? You have the NEL. I guess it's not called NEL anymore, with the Face It League being taking that over. But you have these hotbeds of different styles that kind of grow, and you have a lot more interaction between these regions as well, because you have these tournaments that have American qualifiers, European qualifiers, and it was kind of a rarity actually to have the Chinese get involved in these kind of international qualifiers. It's really easy to set up a tournament. US East teams, like base teams, and also the Western Europe teams. They're all, in the past 2 years, I think majority of tournaments that we as kind of Western fans of Dota, it was very routine to see. Star Ladder has a couple of North American teams, a couple of European teams. Kind of rare to have a Chinese team, right? I think that's what actually made specifically MLG Columbus so unique. MLG Columbus back in, I believe, fall of 2013. That was like the first time we saw a major tournament that was a non-TI have a Chinese team travel, right? Or multiple Chinese. I think it's just one Chinese team DK, right? So just kind of wrapping up on that idea, China kind of does get stagnant, right, in terms of how they play the game, how many fresh ideas come in and out. But with this outside system being much more open, you have these different drafters, different captains, different players, different styles growing, and these interact much more often. And so, like, kind of the cream rises to the crop, right? And every year at TI, you kind of see a little bit of testing. You see little flashes of NA Dota. Kind of strats, right? I think TI4, you saw like Skywrath Mage being played to the support. Like that was, one of the, I think Bulba, showing off the NEL's finest ideas, and then you have FNG going with his own kind of flavor, picking that, Illidan vengeful spirit to this day. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of merit, I think, to that idea that China is much more of an insular scene.
Yeah, and I mean, just to talk a little bit more about that, I guess, since maybe that was one of the main stories. There's a lot of different narratives going on. Some people are saying, if you go with the Ice interview, that the Chinese don't take this tournament as seriously. To expand on that, I think some Chinese players, they make over $1 million a year just off of streaming, and there's people saying, hey, maybe there's not enough incentive left for them to even prepare or do too well at these tournaments because they're making so much money off of just streaming and other things, and they don't really need to perform at these tournaments. Or it could be more along the lines of what Ice said about the lack of adjustment to this new major system, and teams are still maybe taking a bit of a break or just kind of still figuring things out after TI and the frantic build-up and their extremely tight and difficult disciplined practice environments that we just talked about. So that's certainly a factor maybe for these teams. And also at the same time, I mean, again, it's a volatile tournament. Maybe if you played this tournament a bunch of different times, you'd have a different outcome and there wouldn't be all this naysaying. But it definitely is like an eye-opener, maybe something for the Chinese teams to learn from the West a little bit in terms of letting the ideas in. And the other sentiment that I've heard from some of the Chinese commentators and casters was that it's harder to get new blood and this kind of talent that they call Shuai Tai in Chinese. It's kind of like generalship, like a commander, someone who is like puppy type, who can draft and have very original ideas and innovation. It's harder to breed and cultivate those kinds of players because you have so much respected and venerated old blood in the scene. It's hard for them to listen to these more inexperienced, maybe young players who have these kinds of ideas. It's harder for them to kind of just take command and develop those skills. It's easier for them to just be good players and be kind of brought in by these older captains like ROTK and now Lanham and stuff, the old guard. So that might also hurt them in the sense of developing their own like unique drafting talents.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting that you brought that up because I think we saw Invictus Gaming sort of try to go out on a limb, and I guess they kind of did try out those really high-skilled ranked matchmaking players in terms of IG June, right? Back when he hopped on, and even Lua, I believe, I don't believe he was kind of like an experienced Dota player. He was more, again, coming out of those in-house leagues and coming from the public ranked playlists. And I believe like a lot of people really respected, I think, IG June's ability to captain in game, but I think that was sort of a source of contention and like conflict within that team because June had his own ideas of how to approach the game, right? But you have these sort of veterans, Ferrari playing the game since you loaded up Warcraft 3 client. You have Chuan, right? I mean, again, another huge veteran, right? And so you have these sort of super respected, highly regarded, like the old guard, right? Like the super veterans, and then you have this guy who's making a killing on the ranked solo queue, in-game captaining his 3Ks to beat like the enemy like 6K stack, right? I think June was like one of the first players to reach like 7K status almost, and that didn't work out, right? IG disappointed for much of 2014, and they didn't get a lot done, and that team has taken a completely different approach since that time and gone through different iterations. But yeah, I think that's a great case of how you see this kind of clash of new ideas and new blood and kind of the rigidity of the vets.
Yeah, and for that reason, I feel it was a great opportunity although it was because of visa issues with IG, for Newbie Young to be able to get out and play in this international setting. They got a lot of young and promising young players, and as they said, it was a great learning experience for them, and hope to see players like that, more new blood coming into the Chinese scene as well, and who are tomorrow's ROTKs, so to speak.
I guess whoever's on C-Deck, right? I mean, that team is like the one hope left for China. I mean, that's what the forums say, right? From those Chinese forum leaks you get on Reddit once in a while.
Yeah, that's a good example of a team that they said, they domestically they just couldn't get past LGD for a long time before TI, but once they finally broke through, I mean, they showed themselves, and they have in many ways a more Western approach to the game, very aggressive, not the same kind of often we'll see conservative and safe style that Eastern teams are used to employing. So they've obviously been very exciting to watch, and they've quickly become one of the crowd favorites.
I mean, yeah, CDEX, they kind of like do the CIS better than the CIS, right? Just like Davai, 13 minutes in, suddenly have a gyrocopter, casting his ultimate underneath your tier 1 tower, and you're like, what's happening? There's 5 heroes here all of a sudden. Smoke movement, catching everyone off guard. CDEC plays at like a pace that is just, it can just drown you, right? They can just overwhelm you. And that's definitely not something that we used to think is characteristic of the Chinese style, I guess. Yeah, it's taken a long time for them to introduce even... Like, if you think about this kind of, like, current wave of Chinese star talent right now, two players come to mind for me. You have CTY, that plays for eHome, and you have Maybe, who played for LGD, and previously played for CDEC. But those two players didn't have the easiest time in terms of getting onto those tier 1 teams. I think Maybe had, I think he played for CDEC, swapped onto LGD, swapped back down. There's a lot of controversy with that. It took a long time, and suddenly these two players are kind of like the face of the rosters now, and kind of the hope as well. I mean, of course, in addition to CDEC, of China's future in Dota, but just in terms of watching their difficult process to reach where they deserve to be, it just outlines how the Chinese professional scene, it has a lot of drawbacks in terms of how it's currently set up.
Yeah, and we'll obviously be looking to see with the next major announced in Shanghai to see if there's going to be a resurgence. Are the Chinese going to take this more seriously? Are they going to defend their home turf a little better? Although in the past with the G League and I League tournaments, we have seen Western teams as kind of a preview for TI success go into China and do very well. So that will be interesting to keep an eye on. As for Frankfurt, I mean, for me, just a few final words, I guess. I want to give some shout-outs to Coddle Guy, first of all, for being a great stage host and truly just a great person to work with and like fun to talk to and hang out with, very knowledgeable, and just gives a lot of professionalism and good direction. So that guy knows what he's doing, and he's stage trained as well. So, I'm going to keep wishing him continued success in the scene and look forward to working with him again. And I'd like to give another shout out to Alex Bauer, who was the Spanish translator with Team Unknown, who actually was basically recruited by a Reddit post, I think, a few weeks before the tournament.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, another great guy, and through him, he kind of gave me a chance to get to know Team Unknown a little bit and kind of see like the circumstances that they come from to compete, and it's really difficult for them, but the hunger is there, and so is the talent, and we hope that South America is going to become more of a stable presence on the scene, that they can keep these teams together, and that the players can stay motivated and be able to maybe develop that professionalism. They're aware of some of these issues that maybe the community has with their performance or antics or shenanigans, but it's one step at a time. I mean, you start with that talent, and these are very young players for the most part. Yeah. We're used to playing in that kind of PC cafe environment, so it's going to take some time to hone that and get them a little bit more polished. Do you have any shout-outs you'd like to make, Shrew?
Well, I mean, I hope that Nahaz is having a better recovery with his upper respiratory tract infection. He came in, I think, he could barely speak, and I think Twitch chat was they kind of lost a bit of themselves for a moment, lost their composure watching Nahaz be in such a bad state, and kind of Just like open house gets better. Like
Yeah,
that's
I've
my
taken
number
to
one
calling
message.
him the professor now, just because he was, of course, an economics professor. I mean, if I could,
Of
I'd give a
course.
shout out to everybody who's in Frankfurt for doing such a great job, from the
Yeah, it was.
hospitality people to
Mhm.
backstage and all of that. And what was it like from your perspective watching the tournament?
Right, so I wasn't actually at the event like yourself, since I wasn't doing Chinese translations, and I was able to watch the Twitch stream, which was actually considered super smooth. I think that was the general consensus, at least on the Dota 2 Reddit. A lot of people were commending how the production was very smooth, image quality was good, no issues with sound quality. Cough cough and yang, and so I thought the balance of analysts and just personalities on the desk. Casters were great. It was just a super enjoyable tournament to watch as a Twitch spectator. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
it's good stuff.
glad they brought all those people and found a way to include them all. I mean, everybody
Mhm.
is just brings something so unique. You got Pyrian Flax with his great next level observations on stuff. You got Purge, who is relatively new, I think, compared to some of the other guys. But guess what?
Yeah,
This guy's also a class act. Like, he loves to just make you feel right at home and include everybody in his conversations and stuff. He's also very knowledgeable and works very hard, like most of the other people out there. So it's. I mean, again, felt very lucky and blessed to be there. But overall, I think even from the perspective of someone just watching at home, it seemed to be a very successful event and something to be emulated going forward.
yeah, just super excited for the Shanghai Major now. Just super excited now. Because they're just
Yeah.
gonna build on everything, right? They're gonna build on the strengths. Maybe get Shiva in there this time. It's a nice. It feels good to be a Dota fan in 2015. You have a little bit more involvement. They're trying to structure the professional season, so to speak, a little bit better, and they're kind of guaranteeing these high class tournaments get the right. The right setup, the right level of quality delivered to the fans, and that's ultimately what the scene needs the most, right? You just raise the bar. So
Yeah, and then of course, giving teams a chance to compete at huge events other than TI, obviously, which should encourage more growth within the scene and give these other teams an opportunity to play and improve and measure themselves. So
yep.
that's good, and I think that's going to do it for our show. And a couple of mentions I'd love to give. First of all, you can check out our site, defenseofthepatients.com. That's defense, as you would spell it with an S, of the patients. .com, and that's our website. You can find our other episodes there as well. And this is a first with me and Shrew on Pro Dota, but of course, other episodes of Try Hard Tuesdays and Theorycraft Thursdays are there, and you can search for Defense of the Patients on iTunes. You can follow our show on Twitter at DOTP_show. That's DOTP_show. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my very humble Twitter account, I'm at KBBQ Dota, and my co-host Woodshrew is at Woodshrew Dota. That's WOODSHREW Dota. I'm not sure why I suppose that someone wouldn't be able to spell Woodshrew, but that'll work for
Yeah, it's
that.
all good, dude. Give me a hand with my 100 followers. Come on, guys, show up.
And tomorrow our show is going to be, as usual, Theorycraft Thursdays with Ursinity and Proud. And we look forward to continuing to bring you more of these kind of looks inside professional Dota although we stand in a very humble position ourselves, and obviously we don't have all the answers. We love breaking down what's going on in the pro scene and maybe giving things that everybody can think about as well. So, and also when you visit our website, you can click through the Amazon banner to support us and all the DOTP shows. And this is a work in progress, and we'll just keep trying to keep building on this and make this a weekly thing to the best of our ability.
Yeah, we welcome your constructive flames. Just keep it, relatively constructive, but let's go. Let's get this thing going.
All right, great working with you, Shrew, and that's going to be us two signing off for tonight. Have a good one.
Yep. Good night, guys.